aback by this royal ripple. Nobody anticipated the unexpected turn of events that ensued after the little princess, Princess Charlotte, proudly accepted an award. A teacher did the unthinkable in front of a shocked class and immediately regretted it. What could possibly motivate someone to publicly discredit a royal child's accomplishment on television? Hang on tight. Here is where profound remorse, respect, and obligation meet. The snap of a royal moment broke. Perched in the very centre of London, on the morning of June 10, 2025, stood the Grand Assembly Hall of the illustrious Hill House School. Floated outside was the Union Jack. There were golden streamers spiraled from the ceiling, instructors lined the front, and the hall was crowded with parents. When was it? Celebration of the school's annual Excellence Awards. A moment to rejoice in accomplishments, genius, and potential. The 10-year-old Princess Charlotte of Wales, a paragon of poise and wit, stood at the centre of the stage in her immaculate outfit. Her navy blazer was well buttoned. Her face lit up with a little smile. She appeared poised and proud, like any child who has accomplished something on their own, rather than anxious. Next, the time had arrived. Ms. Reynolds, a veteran educator infamous for her stern demeanour and rigid curriculum, was front and centre. On her way to the podium, her high heels sounded like harsh echoes on the wooden floor. A pale gold certificate bearing Charlotte's name was held in her hand. A round of applause was about to start. The live stream cameras from the school briefly turned on. There was a gradual fading of the sound of the parents' applause. Ms. Reynolds lifted the certificate and turned purposefully toward Charlotte as all eyes were on her. She stated, "This does not belong to you," with a flat voice and icy gaze. Shock reverberated through the space. She ripped the certificate in half before anyone could respond. Scrubbed the entire surface. There was no one in the room who could drown out the sound of the torn paper. Everyone in the public stood motionless. All eyes were on them. Looking at each other in disbelief, the teachers took a bow. Some parents got up from their seats out of the blue. Charlotte, the princess, remained silent. She was completely unfazed. With her fingers delicately curled into small fists, her hands remained by her sides. Only once did her gaze droop. At the shattered remnants of her accolade resting on her shine shoes, and then she stood back up, locking eyes with Ms. Reynolds in a silent, unwavering rebellion. She kept her emotions in check. "Keep calm, Queen. Quiet mouth. Absolute stillness." The stillness seemed to have more weight than any yell. The weight of the room seemed to slide from Ms. Reynolds's fingers as she straightened her shoulders and adjusted her weight. She stated firmly that an error had been made. "We verified the outcomes twice. The true victor is now known. Academic achievement, not popularity or personal feelings, is the criteria for this prize." It seemed as if every word were a frigid stone. Things kept happening on camera. Sitting in the first row, Prince William appeared expressionless, his jaw clenched. Sitting a few rows back, Queen Camilla murmured something to an assistant. Decisions were apprehensive. Not at a school, and especially not with a young royal involved, was the scene that none had anticipated. Murmurs started to spread. The phones of a few parents were clumsy. Tension, uncertainty, and a bizarre quality pervaded the room. However, Charlotte remained motionless and unmoved as she stood there. And in that silence, a transformation took place. What began as a formality soon became an event that will be remembered for a long time. That day, something much more substantial than a certificate was torn. The consequences of her actions were only beginning to sink in for Ms. Reynolds. What anyone anticipated, though, was the impact of Charlotte's quiet. Therefore, what exactly broke that day? Be sure to tune in to find out. Silence was more powerful that day. A moment meant to be filled with pride and excitement at Chelsea's venerable Hill House School devolved into something nobody could have foreseen. Weeks of preparation had gone into the event. Seats were set up, banners were hoisted, and speeches were practiced. In the well-lit hall, there were parents, governors, and even a handful of invited royals. The annual Achievement Award ceremony at the school was always a highlight, but this year, the spotlight was squarely on Princess Charlotte of Wales. Just moments before, Ms. Reynolds had announced an error and, in front of hundreds of spectators, snatched Charlotte's trophy from the platform. Like smoke, the words lingered in the air. She had previously stated, "This does not belong to you," before ripping the certificate in half. The cheers had ceased. And so did the grins. Audience members nervously glanced at each other. Some people murmured quietly. People around them remained motionless, disbelieving what they had just seen. Disrespect was only part of it, the cloak of silence added to the perplexity. However, not a single soul spoke. Standing calmly in the center of it all was Charlotte. Her lips formed a delicate line, and she slightly lifted her chin. But the tiniest detail would be visible if you peered closely enough. As she walked, her left hand shook slightly at her side. There was no terror. Fear was not present. That was self-control. Then, out of nowhere, a dark-suited man stepped up from across the stage. There was no set time for his arrival just yet. Even though he wasn't a part of the show, he stood at the curtain's edge and stared at Charlotte and Ms. Reynolds. He maintained an air of polished professionalism. You couldn't interpret his expression. In the wings, a production assistant was heard through a headset, her speech barely audible. "We've got a problem and it's Princess Charlotte," she whispered, half-hunched. Behind the curtain, her eyes darting between screens and scripts. And then something unexpected happened. Charlotte bent down slowly and carefully as if nothing around her was crumbling. She reached for the two torn halves of her certificate. Her movements were delicate, but deliberate. As she stood, she didn't look at Ms. Reynolds. She didn't glance at the cameras. She didn't look toward her father in the audience or the whispering faces in the crowd. She simply folded the paper, softly, gently, once over, and held it in her small hands like it still mattered. The hall murmured. No words came from her mouth, not a single sound. But somehow, that silence echoed louder than any protest. The moment stretched out, heavy with unspoken meaning. Something had shifted, but began as a celebration of excellence had turned into a live, unscripted moment of dignity and quiet power. And while the cameras kept rolling and the whispers spread like wildfire, Princess Charlotte remained where she was, unmoved, undiminished, and the world had just begun to understand what they had witnessed. And then came the moment no one saw coming. Was it defiance or destiny? Stay glued to your screen. A crown torn and unspoken. Behind the velvet curtains and polished podiums of Hill House School's Grand Assembly Hall, the quiet tension had started to boil. It was still June 10, 2025. Outside, the sun gleamed off the rooftops of Chelsea. Inside, the air was thick with disbelief. On one backstage monitor, Ms. Reynolds could be seen standing rigidly at the front of the stage, her expression tight with pride. Chin high, shoulders squared, as if convinced she'd done the right thing by tearing Princess Charlotte's award. On another screen, the suited man who had stepped forward earlier was now approaching the side steps. He clutched a black leather folder to his chest. His jaw was tight. He bit his lower lip, as if preparing for something much bigger than an award ceremony. Meanwhile, Charlotte had stepped aside, not dismissed, but sidelined. She now sat quietly at the edge of the platform, legs crossed at the ankles, hands busy with something others might have tossed aside. But not her. In her lap were the two torn halves of her certificate. She smoothed them with care, pressing out the creases like they were pages from a royal decree. One corner of the paper was missing, and she noticed it too. Without a word, she tucked the torn certificate carefully into the inside pocket of her blazer. To her, it still meant something. She glanced up for a moment, scanning the room, but not really looking at anyone. Her gaze floated past the rows of stunned parents, past the hovering photographers, past even her family. Her expression remained unreadable. No anger, no sadness, just that same quiet strength she had shown all along. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The hall was still hushed, though whispers began to rise like slow smoke. Then a soft metallic clink broke the stillness. Something small had fallen from Charlotte's pocket, bouncing once on the wooden floor, before coming to rest beside her shoe. Heads in the front row turned. A few students leaned forward. One boy squinted. It was a pin, a delicate silver lapel pin shaped like a laurel wreath. Simple, but unmistakable. A girl in the second row leaned in, eyes wide. "Wait," she whispered to her classmate. "Isn't that from the National Academic Alliance?" It was. The pin, awarded only to students who scored in the top 1% of national evaluations across the UK, was rarely seen outside official competitions. And here it was, lying next to Princess Charlotte's polished shoe, unnoticed by her, but not by anyone else, now watching. Whispers turned into rustling. A murmur passed through the crowd like wind through leaves. The suited man reached the top of the steps. His eyes now focused squarely on Charlotte. A headset crackled backstage as a coordinator rushed to adjust the lighting. But Charlotte remained still, calm, composed. Whatever storm had begun on that stage, she wasn't running from it. She was sitting right in the center of it, quietly holding the torn remains of her award, a symbol of something much greater than anyone in that room yet understood. Then came the moment she held torn truth in her hands. Was it defeat or defiance? Keep watching. When Truth stepped on stage. Inside Hill House School's historic assembly hall, the tension was no longer subtle. It sat thick in the air, pressing down on every breath, every blink. It wasn't just nerves anymore. It was the kind of tension that made even the lighting seem heavier. The golden hues from the chandeliers, once comforting and warm, now cast long, uneasy shadows across the polished floor and ornate ceiling. It was as though the room itself had drawn in a breath and refused to exhale. The applause had ended long ago. It hadn't faded naturally. It had been cut short, strangled by disbelief, and in its place sat an uncomfortable stillness. The kind that settles when something important has been disturbed. The kind that lingers when no one knows what to say next. But everyone senses that something significant is about to happen. But to understand what was unfolding on that stage, you had to step back a few days, just a little, back to a quieter, hidden chapter of this story. It didn't begin in front of cameras or beneath chandeliers. It didn't involve fanfare or titles or crowds. Just days earlier, this story had started in a very different place, a plain room in Cambridge. There were no lights, no audience, no royal titles, no applause. It had been a quiet Saturday afternoon. Outside, the wind moved through trees along the cobblestone streets. Inside, the room was filled only with the scratch of pencils, the soft clicking of a stopwatch, and the calm breathing of concentration. No cameras, no royal staff. Just 4 judges were seated at a long oak table, each with a notepad, evaluating the final round of the National Academic Alliance's Elite Math Challenge. Among the students that day was one girl, just another name on the list, except she hadn't used her real name. Princess Charlotte had entered the competition under a pseudonym, Amamira C. Wales, a name chosen to shield her identity, to be judged not by status, but by skill. She sat quietly like the others, her blazer neat, her focus razor sharp. No one knew her face, no one knew her background. And yet, by the end of the day, everyone in that room knew her brilliance. Equations were solved in seconds. Patterns were spotted before others had even begun their calculations. Her answers weren't just correct. They were elegant, thoughtful, fast. And then came the final round. A logic puzzle so complex it had only ever been solved twice in the competition's history. She didn't hesitate. She completed it blindfolded. Later, one of the judges, a seasoned Oxford mathematics fellow, was overheard saying almost in disbelief, "She's not just gifted, she's a prodigy, 1 in 10 million." And now here at Hill House, that same judge, Dr. Raymond Ellis, stepped into the light. The man in the dark suit finally reached the stage. He didn't wait for an introduction. He didn't glance at the host for approval or check the event's schedule. With deliberate steps, he walked straight up the stairs. A black leather folder clutched to his chest like it held something far more powerful than paper. The host of the ceremony blinked in confusion, his mouth half open, unsure whether to continue or step aside. Ms. Reynolds narrowed her eyes, brow creasing. She recognized him, but too late. Her posture faltered. But Princess Charlotte, she didn't look surprised. From her seat on the edge of the platform, she raised her chin ever so slightly, not with arrogance, with recognition. She knew that voice. She knew that walk. And most of all, she knew what was coming. The man reached the center of the stage. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. His voice was steady, calm, measured. But every word struck like a bell in a cathedral, clear, deep. Impossible to ignore. "Good afternoon," he said. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe there's been a mistake." A ripple passed through the audience, a soft rush of air as if the room had exhaled all at once. Whispers stirred like wind behind heavy velvet curtains. He opened the leather folder slowly, carefully, like someone unsealing a royal document. Inside, he pulled out an embossed letter bearing the seal of the National Academic Alliance. Alongside it, a scanned copy of a test sheet signed only with the initials ACW. Charlotte remained seated. Her expression was unreadable. The torn certificate still rested, folded in her blazer pocket. The silver laurel pin at her feet shimmered faintly beneath the stage lights. And Ms. Reynolds, for the first time that morning, looked unsure. Something was shifting. Something quiet, but powerful. The kind of shift that happens before a wave breaks. But Princess Charlotte didn't stand. Not yet. Because she didn't need to. She had already done the hardest part. Now, the truth was walking itself to the surface. So, how did Princess Charlotte stay seated and still command the room? This moment only gets more powerful. The day a princess didn't flinch. What began as a polished ceremony meant to celebrate academic excellence had slowly unraveled into something no script could have predicted. Royal banners still fluttered outside. Cameras stayed locked in place. And inside the hall, the air had thickened into something far heavier than awkward silence. People weren't just confused anymore. They were waiting, watching, bracing. Princess Charlotte sat at the edge of the stage, her blazer neat, her hand still holding the gently folded remains of her torn certificate. Around her, no one moved. Even the lighting crew backstage had stopped adjusting their equipment. It was as though time had paused, just long enough for truth to catch up. And then, finally, it did. The suited man who had climbed the stage steps now stood tall at the microphone. His tone was calm, but carried the weight of authority, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. "My name," he began, "is Dr. Raymond Ellis. I'm not here to interrupt. I'm here to correct something." The room turned to stone. Ms. Reynolds, who only moments earlier had torn up Charlotte's award, visibly stiffened. Her mouth parted, then closed again. Her fingers twitched at her side. Dr. Ellis continued without flinching. "Not the mistake you're all thinking of," he said, now holding the black leather folder in front of him, "but one that has to be set right now." A beat of silence. "I'm the executive director of the National Academic Alliance." Gasps rolled through the audience like a southern gust. Some leaned forward in their chairs. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. Ms. Reynolds stepped forward, her voice quick. Nervous. "Sir, this student wasn't on the final list." He held up a hand. "You're absolutely right," he said gently. "She wasn't on the list. That's because her name wasn't part of the crowd. It was at the very top." Silence again, sharp this time. "Out of more than 12,000 students from across the UK, he continued, Princess Charlotte registered under the academic name Amamira C. Wales didn't just qualify, she ranked number 1, not out of pity, not by vote, by pure performance, by merit, by brilliance." He opened the folder slow and deliberate. Inside was a new certificate, laminated, embossed, official. The seal of the National Academic Alliance shimmered under the lights. There was no mistaking it. "We had planned to announce this achievement next week during our summer summit in Oxford, but after what I just witnessed on this stage, this recognition can't wait." He turned, stepping towards Charlotte. His hands were steady as he extended the certificate with both arms. "Congratulations, Amamira," he said softly. "You earned this, not because of your title, not because someone handed it to you, but because you're brilliant and no one can take that from you." Charlotte stood slowly, no rush, no drama, just the poise of someone who had nothing left to prove. With both hands, she grasped the certificate. She quietly expressed her gratitude, her voice barely audible. She then turned to face the audience and held the certificate aloft. Speak freely, cry if you must. At this point, her quiet was more powerful than any royal decree. The cameras remained motionless. They were under no need to. It was impermanent. Ms. Reynolds took a step back. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Her formerly icy self-assurance seemed to be melting away. Princess Charlotte, with her shoulders back and her gait composed, gracefully descended from the podium. She kept her head held high. She took her time. Instead of fleeing, she stayed put. Getting up, she strolled away. What, though, did Princess Charlotte know that enabled her to depart with more strength? Continue to observe. I am not yet finished with this. They were unable to rip the electricity. Leaving the stage with deliberate slowness, Princess Charlotte waited for the lights to dim a bit, signaling the beginning of the next part of the ceremony. No turning around for her. She paid little mind to the cameras that seemed to be following her everywhere she went. She could have skipped it. The scene had spoken volumes. She clutched the new certificate as if it were a holy object, holding it close to her bosom. Okay, one piece of paper, no problem. However, at that very time, it seemed like armor. Evidence that the unspoken truth may still be heard. It was clear that she was not smiling. She showed no signs of emotion. Nothing changed on her face. Her demeanor remained unwavering. However, her eyes now revealed an undeniable truth. Not success or pride, but something more profound. Consistency, power, and poise when challenged. Because no amount of formal recognition or a printed trophy could have given that day its true authority. No judge or royal family was associated with it. The world around her gasped, muttered, and shifted, but the one person who said nothing spoke it. In all her years, Charlotte had never once sought pity or sought accolades. She had merely demanded justice, and when it was refused, she remained firm without yelling or gesturing. That decision, that silence, was the most powerful thing there was. People began to scatter as she made her way past the chairs and down the stage steps. The students, who had been standing quietly a moment ago, now leaned aside to create room, their expressions ranging from wonder to comprehension. Looking around, parents realized they were witnessing something much more than a school ceremony. The movement embodied decency. Despite Ms. Reynolds's efforts to cling to what little control she had, Charlotte continued on her way, ignoring the cameras and lights. Far beyond the burden of anticipation that had followed her from the moment of her conception. The victory wasn't signified by the certificate. Yes, she was. In a society where shouting is the norm, she had demonstrated to them the power of remaining silent. That raising your voice is unnecessary. You are valuable just the way you are, and there's no need to prove it. Because true strength isn't necessarily audible. The unshakable hand is sometimes the one that matters. A slow step, a stillness that refuses to fold. When it remains intact and unbroken for an extended period of time, it becomes truly remarkable. Not long after Charlotte stepped out of the main hall and into the light cast by the polished wooden doors, the talks resumed. Many remained sitting, while a few blinked in shock. As they attempted to take it all in, several people sat silently. It escaped any attention in the news. No biographer of the royal family could have written it. It was about more than just a female performing on stage. It was for all the young people who have ever felt unwelcome, who have had something they worked for taken away from them, and who have had to prove, in their own way, that they were more than what other people thought they were. Additionally, Princess Charlotte took care of it for everyone. In other words, you don't have to shout to be heard, sometimes, quiet authority is enough. On occasion, it's serene. But it's always significant. For that reason, it has stood the test of time. To what do you attribute the room's eventual silence? Quiet power or her royal title? Leave a comment with your ideas. Please subscribe, like, and share for more content like this.